The first time I heard the word colonialism, I was in primary school. I think about 4th grade. The school I was attending then used the more Americanized way of numbering, like the classes, which was a grade system, compared to the British way of using primary for it. So primary 1, primary 2, primary 3. So I was in the 4th grade and it was brought up in my class. And for the longest time, my definition of colonialism was basically Britain brought its dusty ass to my country to exercise control over my people, stripping us of our autonomy and resources to help fund the British Empire. The older I grew, the more I realized that colonialism presents different faces and different forms. And then I also realized that colonialism and imperialism are pretty much intertwined. Or as this paper that was submitted to the English department at Lehigh University better explained, the simple way to distinguish these two is to think of colonialism as practice and imperialism as the idea driving the practice. And it's important to have that clarity because some of the books I am going to be mentioning shortly when this video officially starts, Lord, this is the longest intro ever, but some of the books I will be mentioning eventually have anti-colonialist themes that you might think, oh, is that not more anti-imperialism than anti-colonialist? The point is to point out just how interconnected and intertwined the two concepts are. So now that I'm done with this uber long intro, let's move on to 20 books with anti-colonialist themes. And I would like to quickly prefix the fact that some of these books are books I have read myself, and some of them are books my friends have read, and some of them are books that have been recommended to me. So let's get started with the very first book, Arrow of God by Chinua Achebe. I know I stand on an opinion that is totally, completely, utterly different from everybody else's because, see, the more preferred work of Achebe is Things Fall Apart. In fact, most Nigerians prefer Things Fall Apart, but my favorite Achebe novel is actually Arrow of God, and I've loved it since the very first time I read it. See, Things Fall Apart is about Okonkwo's downfall, right? Is hubris, is stubbornness, the last stand it takes, and how it eventually leads to his downfall, all set against the backdrop of colonialist administration and basically the political aspect / angle through which colonialism stuck its way into Eastern Nigeria. But see, Arrow of God looks at British colonialism not through administrative or political lenses, but from a religious perspective, to show how the colonialists attacked the Igbos, and which was basically something that they did in other parts of Nigeria, not just Igbo land. Because see, the system was a tearing down of our people, of our way of life, and a subjugation, which was what you could see in Things Fall Apart. But it was also a tearing down of our culture and our customs and our religious beliefs, and a further subjugation. And that is what you see in Arrow of God, because in Arrow of God we follow our lead character Ezelu, who is the chief priest of Ulu, the god that is worshipped in 6 different villages. And like Okonkwo, Ezelu is also stubborn. He also has hubris. He also makes a last stand, and he also experiences his downfall. It's a book that is brilliantly told. I absolutely love it. I always look forward to doing a reread, and yeah, Arrow of God by Chinua Achebe. Next up is Everfair by Nishi Shaw, which is an alternate history novel that asks a very important question, an anti-colonialist question. What if Belgium never colonized the Congo? What if the people of the Congo had discovered steam technology way ahead of Belgium? What if a land was purchased for the sole reason of creating an utopian society that would house both returning slaves and maltreated Africans and their descendants, and African-American missionaries, Europeans and East Asians, and everybody coming together to live in this utopian society? How would they govern themselves? How would they live? How would they find romance? How would they find love? I think that there's something powerfully anti-colonialist about reimagining a history that was not tainted by colonialism. Then there's Churchill's Secret War, the British Empire and the Ravaging of India during World War II by Madhusri Mukherjee. You see, when conversations arise about men in power who treated another group of people as lesser, as less than, and that treatment led to the death of millions of people, often Hitler is the face and the name that pops to mind. Not so many people automatically think of Winston Churchill and the legacy of starvation and death and discrimination that he left in his wake in India. Madhusri Mukherjee explores the barbarism of Churchill's actions that led to the death of over 3 million Indians with the Bengal famine of 1943, where Indians were starved solely for the political gain of Britain. The streets were littered with corpses, and Winston Churchill considered those bodies irrelevant and instead chose to stockpile the food he got from India, food that would have prevented the starvation and death of over 3 million people, and sent it to Britain and Europe for their post-war recovery efforts. 3 million Indians. Madhusri Mukherjee uses historical documentation and research to show us just how vile a person, a man, Winston Churchill is. And it lends credence to the words, that of what they say about the victor being the one to write to tell the tale. I would like to say though that trigger warning for mentions of starvation and death. I've already mentioned it earlier in this video, but apparently Madhusri Mukherjee did not hold back any punches, so trigger warning for that. Next up is Decolonizing the Mind, the Politics of Language in African Literature by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. A lot of the times when we talk about colonialism, we forget that it's not just stealing of resources and people and our art. It goes beyond that. Colonialism also involves the forceful taking of our language. I grew up in a country that did not exist before the Britons came and just drew lines and borders and amalgamated people who had absolutely nothing in common except for the fact that we happen to be in a geographical location that Britain wanted control over. And just like that, Nigeria was birthed. Well, like I said, we were different people, varying tribes and languages and cultures, but they forced us together and enforced their language, English, on all of us. I speak Yoruba, I read it, I write it, I speak it, but in school I could not say that because I would be punished. I would be punished if I'd tried, if I'd even attempted it. What does that say to you about a country that Britain seemingly gave us our independence in 1960? This was my experience growing up in the 90s. That was what, 30 old years after British independence, and that was still what was being enforced in the school. Like the colonialists were looking over the shoulders of our teachers, demanding every single student must speak the English language, and they still do it today. And that is what Ngugi wa Thiong'o explores in his book, The Colonialist Undertones of Language, how elitist it is. I'm not gonna lie, the way my relatives praise me, oh, you speak English so well. I'm telling you, there is absolutely no state, no country that was colonized where you will not get that as a compliment. And whether this is like you were colonized by the British and so you're speaking English, or the French and you're speaking French, like there is this certain, there's the way in which they treat you. It irks me. It really irks me. This belief that speaking English and only English is what makes you an intelligent, cultured person. Not when you're like speaking and defaulting to Swahili or Yoruba or Tiv or Hausa or Ishan. No, but English language. Just think for a moment about how insane and outrageous that is. That is colonialism at work. Language is a tool of colonialism. and a tool we can also use for anti-colonialist discourse. And I fully recognize the irony of saying this whilst speaking English language. No more. No more. I know very well the irony right now. Next up is Treasure by Kiru Taye. Now this is the first book in Kiru's Men of Valor series, and it's a historical romance novel that takes place in pre-colonial Igbo land. Yes, you heard me right. Pre-colonial Igbo land. And in this we follow Adaku, who is brilliant and beautiful and headstrong and royally pissed. My girl is pissed that she's being forced to marry a man that she did not choose, and so decides to shun him on their wedding night and every night after that. And her husband, Obina, recognizes consent, recognizes what consent is and means, because it's like, if she doesn't want it, it's just going to have to wait and see what happens. And so he waits and waits until she chooses to be with him. Like, let me give you a quick recap. This book takes place it's a historical romance novel that takes place in pre-colonial Igbo land, and you have a woman who is insisting that she's not interested in this man she's been forced to marry, and shuns him and refuses to have sex with him. And the man, the husband, understands consent and is like, okay, fine, if you change your mind, I'll be here. I will just keep loving you from afar. Like, you are welcome, y'all. You are welcome. Moving on from that moment of levity to a more serious book. Now, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by the settler state that is Israel has been ongoing since 1947-48. With the Nakba that saw the displacement of over 700,000 Palestinians and the establishment of the Israeli colonialist settler state. In Zionist Colonialism in Palestine by Fayez A. Sayegh, Fayez gives us an understanding into the ideology that led to the creation of the settler state of Israel, why it's a lie and utterly harmful to Palestinians, and the complicit role that America played and is still playing in upholding and funding Israel's apartheid of Palestinians. It's short, but it's quite an introduction into, like I said, something that has been happening for over 70 years. Over 70 years. But it's important to note that Fayez did write this book in 1965, and so we're missing decades of quite a lot of the more recent atrocities that have been committed in the last 50 years. And yes, I said 50 years because this was written in 1965, so we're looking at almost 60 years here. If, however, you want something more recent, there is Ilan Pape's The Biggest Prison on Earth, A History of the Occupied Territories, which is a follow-up to his other book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. In The Biggest Prison on Earth, Ilan, using archival research, NGO records and eyewitness accounts, shows us in unflinching light the brutalizing effect of Israel's occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, from the human and civic rights abuses, the mass arrests, the house searches, the IDF roadblocks, and the wall that was built to keep Gazans in the world's largest open-air prison. It's a difficult read, yes, but it's important because it's a documentation of these atrocities so that history would remember. And considering the fact that Ilan is an anti-Zionist Jew who is also a historian, there's a certain legitimacy to his work. If, however, you prefer your history in a novel format, then do check out the historical novel Mornings in Jenin by Susan Abulawa, which follows 4 generations of the Abulahas' family from before the ethnic cleansing of their village in 1947-1948 to the 1967 occupation of the West Bank, to the refugee camp massacres in Beirut, to the refugee camp massacre in Jenin. It's part fiction, part documentary, and we learn about a heartbroken father forcefully separated from his home and his olive trees, to a son whose family becomes fatherless when he's shot by an Israeli bullet, to Amal who experiences life. Yes, baby. What is it? Do you want to say hello? Is that it? It's like, no, I don't want to say hello. Hi, baby. No, I don't want you to touch my chin. You're going to get lipstick all over your paws. Hi. Oh, shit. And you just got lipstick all over your paws. I was trying to avoid that. See, now your paw is like red. Come Pop, I was trying to avoid this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, baby. Okay, I think you're clean now. Do you want to go this way? To Amal, who experiences life through all of this, from the kidnapping of one of her twin brothers by an Israeli soldier who raises the boy Jewish, to other twin brother who joins the resistance. It's a story of family and parenthood, of heartbreak and pain and love and loss. But if you love science fiction, and honestly, who doesn't love science fiction? Let's be honest. Science fiction gives us the opportunity to imagine a future, to imagine our future. Decades from now, centuries from now, how would things have changed? What would remain the same? What would humanity have become? And I think that science fiction, for a people that have been as brutalized as the Palestinians, science fiction is a form of anti-colonialist resistance, which was definitely what the publishers of Palestine Plus 100 had in mind. A question was posed to 12 Palestinian writers. What might your country look like in 2048, 100 years after the Nakba? This book is an answer to that question. From science fiction noir to a dystopian nightmare to a high-tech farce to superheroes, it's an imagining that science fiction allows us, and the writers ran with it. For the next book, I would start with a question, and that is, what is more anti-colonialist than resistance? What is more anti-colonialist than the preservation of a people's legacy and culture and history and mythology? This is what Jenin Chang explores in her novel, The Library of Legends. The year is 1937. The Japanese are dropping bombs on Nanking in their onward quest to conquer China as a whole, and our lead protagonist, Hulian, alongside her classmates at Minghua University, set out on an exodus with the Library of Legends, which is this rare collection of books that is filled with Chinese myth and legends and folklore. And as they move, China's immortals and guardian spirits also embark on an odyssey of their own. Jenin Chang has stated in an interview that her story was inspired by a real-life story, the one her father told her that back during the war, when the Japanese army was approaching, China had all its students in the universities move inland because the scholars and the students were the future of the nation. And so whilst the soldiers went out to fight, the students and their teachers were part of moving universities, this caravan of universities that carried the books and were learning and studying and keeping things that they needed and moving inland to preserve their culture. That is resistance. That is anti-colonialist resistance. And this book is beautiful and the language is just brilliant, especially because there are conversations about displacements and what it means, and I found it very relevant, especially considering present situations and circumstances. So, The Library of Legends by Jenin Chang. Now, white saviorism, a trope whereby they usually had white people come to the rescue of the oppressed people who were just sitting and waiting to be rescued. I'm certain we've seen it. You know, Hollywood really made it very, very popular because it was subliminal messaging and they wanted people to feel like they are coming to the rescue. We all know that that is 100% bullshit. And in Insurgent Empire, Anti-Colonial Resistance and British Dissent, Premyavada Godal shows us that she explores the consistent, keyword being consistent, resistance that the colonies put up from the West Indies to East Africa to Egypt to India. Insurgent Empire shows us clearly that the colonies were not passively sitting on their behinds waiting to be rescued. In fact, a significant number of their resistance efforts were co-opted by the West to center themselves in the fight for resistance instead of the colonies who were actually putting in the work. Now, we cannot talk about colonialism and settler states and not address the elephant in the room. America, the home of the free and the land of the brave, or as I like to call it, America, the home of the thieves and the land of mass genocide. And this is captured exceptionally well in Nick Estie's Our History is the Future, Standing Rock versus the Dakota Pipeline and the Long Indigenous Resistance, which, as it's stated in the title, is focused on indigenous resistance. Centuries of it, and how it led to the #NoDAPL movement, which has grown to be the largest indigenous protest movement in the 21st century. Our History is the Future is a historical manifesto and an archiving of intergenerational resistance, whilst also showing how interconnected resistance is all around the world, how various resistance movements are partners in a bid to gain freedom for all. For example, Oseti Sakowin's collaboration with the non-aligned movement, the Palestine Liberation Organization, the African Nationalist Movement, and so much more. And then there's the common wind, Afro-American currents in the age of the Asian Revolution by Julius S. Scott. Now, as someone who works in communication, I find historical work that examines systems of communication and how oppressed groups use them as a tool, as a means to dismantle colonialist systems of oppression, as seen in the case of the Asian Revolution. And this is what Julius S. Scott explores in his book. The communication networks of people of African descent, slaves and freed folks, sailors and pirates, runaway slaves and merchants, creating this seamless system of communication that could not be suppressed no matter how hard the white slavers and colonialists tried to suppress it. And what that meant that they could not suppress it was that there was a building of dissent, of slaves escaping, of liberation that eventually culminated in the Asian Revolution, that then lent a heavy weight and served as motivation for the push for the global freedom of the enslaved. If, however, you prefer mysteries, you know, serial killers, murders that were masqueraded as suicides, and a country that was smack dab in the middle of the Troubles, which of course is the decades-long struggle where the IRA, not the taxation auditing system in the United States, no, I'm talking about the Irish Republican Army, fought for the end of British rule in Northern Ireland. Then Adrian McKinty's The Cold Ground, which is the first book in a Sean Duffy series, might be just the pick for you. Set in Northern Ireland in 1981, we follow Detective Sergeant Sean Duffy, a man tasked with finding the connection between riots, power cuts, hunger strikes, a homophobic serial killer who has a fondness for the opera, a suicide that might not necessarily be a suicide, all the while dealing with the distrust that accompanies him everywhere due to him being a Catholic policeman, and the fact that one of the victims was involved in the IRA, and shortly before the person died, he was seen talking to someone from the Loyalist Ulster Volunteer Force. It is fast, it is brutal. Our detective has to keep on his toes because, yeah, it could die on this job. This is technically a job that would have you wondering if it has life insurance, because poor Sean Duffy. Now, one narrative that colonialists like to push is that they discovered a place, or that the indigenous people of that land had no culture, no history, that they were barbaric savages waiting to be rescued by the benevolent white overlord who often has no idea of the lay of the land and cannot even navigate for shit. Now, if it is that it is Christopher Columbus that just popped into your mind as I was speaking, good for you. I was referring to Mungo Park, the white man who claimed to discover the River Niger. Discover my ass. Anyway, back to my point. This erasure of indigenous people is usually combated by oral tradition, which is stories that are passed on from mouth to mouth. So it's a generational tale, and it's up to the newer generation to know the story and pass it on to the generation after them. Now, the stories are often lost when it is that the present storyteller does not find or is not able to meet another storyteller in their lifetime that they can then share the story with. And that is how stories of people's cultures die with certain people. But this all changes when the oral tradition becomes written down, when somebody is actually able to write it down. Which is the reason why the existence of Kealumoku's The Kumulipo, a Hawaiian creation chant, is utterly brilliant and brings me to tears, good tears, because it's something to be thankful for, the existence of that piece of culture and history, the preservation of the sacred chant put in writing so that future generations get to read and know the chant like they know their own name. A 2,000-word poem that traces a family and people's divine origin and history from the very beginning, the creation of the world. To have that documented for posterity, that is huge. It's yet another way of reminding the world that Hawaii belongs to the people of Hawaii, not America's settler colonist ass. Dusty as my 50th state my ass. Still speaking of poems, there is Return to My Native Land by Amy Cesare. Now this is a long poem that can only be described in one word, and that is rage. There is so much rage, justified rage, the rage I feel every single time I remember what was done to my people. Rage. Amy Cesare uses poetry to scream at the colonialist oppression of the French. And it is from that rage that is born yet another form of resistance, which is the celebration of the black identity. A celebration for which himself, Leopold Senghor, and Leon Damas coined the phrase, the term negritude in their student magazine L'Étudiant Noir, which is translated as a black student. So apologies, I know my French is abysmal, and for that I apologize. So negritude is the term that was coined as a synonym for the celebration of the black identity, the shared black identity and confidence, self-confidence, which was their very loud, very vocal fuck you to French colonialist racism, which had a leg, a very skinny leg, that was basically the French trying to push a system of self-hatred on the black colonies for them to, you know, basically think of themselves as lesser than the French. The language that Amy Cesare uses in Return to My Native Land is lush and vivid and beautiful and loud and evocative, and sometimes it's quiet and serene and worshipful, if that makes any sense. Just, it's beautiful, it's utterly beautiful. Next on my list is Wild Seed by Octavia E. Butler. So in this book we have two immortal beings, right? You have Doro and you have Anyanwu. Now Doro is utterly, completely psychopathic. It is a total, complete psychopath, killing people on a whim every time it takes control, like it becomes the host of their bodies. It kills them off, they die. And as a character, he fears no one until Anyanwu shows up. She, and by she I'm referring to Anyanwu, is a bulletproof shapeshifter who can heal with a kiss and who has the ability to destroy anybody that would come for her. But Doro is the only person that she fears, and vice versa. Now, I hate eugenics. I cannot stand it, and we cannot discount the fact that a lot of eugenics research and study are very centered around whiteness. After all, Western eugenists have tried to use eugenics as a means to call non-white folks. But then you have Doro in this story. Doro, who is an immortal. Doro, who technically is an eugenist. In fact, he's been one for way longer before the Western eugenists came on the scene. Doro is a bully and a psychopath, and it gives everybody the creeps. I've not read the books here, right? But based off of everybody's reaction, it gives everybody the creeps. But his existence as a character is anti-colonialist. Yes, is the villain of the story, but also Octavia E. Butler uses him to flip the switch, this time around have it be a black man who has been a eugenist for way longer than white people, and we're the ones that discovered science bullshit. Like, that is anti-colonialist. Now, with the arrival of the colonialists who were accompanied by the white missionaries, there was a demonization of African traditional culture. And that is a legacy of colonialism that still haunts Africans and Africa till this very day. So having books that thwart that, having books that celebrate African indigenous religions and culture are by their very existence anti-colonialist literature, which is the reason why I absolutely love Dr. Nnedi Okorafor's use of Afro-Jujuism in her stories. Because see, juju is the Nigerian term for black magics, right? And it's always used in this derogatory, scary, creepy, you're coming with this juju type way, and she owns that and she uses that in her writing. She categorizes her writing under that, and just the existence of Afro-Jujuism in itself is already anti-colonialist, and I love it. But then you also have anti-colonialist themes in her books themselves, and I will pick one of my favorite book of hers. Like, Nnedi has so many of my favorite books. I'll pick one of my favorite books, and no, it's not going to be Who Fears Death, because I've spoken about that book recently and you all know how much I love it. No, I'm going to talk about yet another favorite Dr. Nnedi Okorafor book I love, which is Zahra the Windseeker. It's a middle grade book where we follow Zahra, this young girl who has locks and is ostracized and despised because of her locks. But see, her locks give her power, and this is a power that grows, that she ends up like going to this forbidden forest to practice, to train how to harness that power. And when her best friend's life is put in danger as a result of that, it will be up to Zahra to save him. And the fact that Dr. Okorafor has Zahra have locks, because the criminalization of black hair is also an effect of colonialism, right? Because they were like, your hair is spongy, your hair is different, etc., etc. Especially locks. They especially had things to say about locks, and this perception a lot of people have about locks, about them being matted and dirty and this, it's actually carried over, is biases that they subconsciously took on from colonialists and their perception of our hair. And to have Unedi use Zahra's hair as her source of power is just, that is one of the most anti-colonialist shit ever. And I loved it. And that book is great. Like, that book is amazing. Like, I absolutely love that. Now, if you all thought I was going to talk about anti-colonialist books and not bring up the book that was inspired by pre-Columbian Americas, you all don't know me very well, because of course I am going to mention Rebecca Runhorse's Black Sun, which centers the city of Tova, a city that is preparing for its annual winter solstice, which is meant to be a period of celebration until it's realized that there won't be any celebration that year because the earth and the sky would meet. They would converge under the black sun. In other words, the world would soon experience an unbalancing. Our main character, Ziala, is the captain of a ship and is on her way to Tova. And the only passenger she has on her ship is this seemingly armless person, this seemingly armless man. And she is very much aware that it is the people who appear armless that are the true villains. Like, I've still not read Black Sun, but goddamn, I can't wait to read that book because spectacular, absolutely spectacular. And finally, what better place to end this video on anti-colonialist books than on the Buchi Emecheta herself and her book, trigger warning, The Rape of Shavi. Set in 1983, the book examines the destruction of the planet that was caused by European scientists who, together with European civilians, escaped the impending nuclear destruction and had their planes crash in the fictional country of Shavi, an African utopia where people are treated equally. The community was scientifically advanced and they were hospitable enough to take in the European civilians and scientists who crashed, and had their hospitality met with exploitation, showing in clear terms the violations committed by these colonialists, set against the backdrop of a nation that was wealthy and advanced, with a well-organized society that had the rule of law in place, with people who lacked for nothing. It's not the lawless, poor, backwards, barbaric propaganda that Western nations like to feed to others that is what Africa is. No, Buchi Emecheta captures the Africa she knew and heard about and read about from history books, the ones that were inventing and creating and so well advanced before the targeted violence, exploitation, slavery, and colonialism.